when Dwayne gave me a compliment. I said, "Have you been taking acting lessons, though?" I was quite impressed. He replied, "I just did as you said, Your Holiness. And I may have rehearsed a few times." I replied, "It shows your acting was truly terrible the first time we practiced. You really might want to consider a career as an actor when all this is." Hearing our conversation, the Empress got irritated. She then shouts, "Enough of this nonsense. I don't know what you're playing at. But you'd be remiss to think I hadn't planned for these sorts of complications. If one file isn't enough to take you down." The Empress quickly took another bottle out of her clothes. Perhaps another poisonous incense she had prepared as a precaution. What a well-prepared person. She quickly opened the bottle. Yet her face hardened as she saw us standing still after a few seconds. Then I spoke. "It doesn't work. And that's not poisonous incense." I also pointed to the bottle rolling on the floor. "That one, too." Then the Empress opened her eyes wide. Ariel continued, "It's a paralyzing poison. The Guard Knights and His Imperial Majesty will wake up in an hour." At my words, she started to take a step back, as if in disbelief. She muttered, "No, it can't be." Her lips trembled. Flashback. Few days ago Prince came to temple. Kyle, who received the letter I had sent through Noah, had arrived at the temple. And we shared sincere opinions and discussions. Those who prosper by drugs, perish by drugs. Once a cheater, always a cheater. Kyle frowned at the phrase I had written during that time. He asked, "What is this?" I replied, "Once you take the easy road, it's hard to get out of it." He nodded at the plausible explanation. Ariel continued, "What I'm a little worried about is the Empress' future move." Prince replied, "We plan to narrow the range of options." Having lived in an era in which trap investigations were illegal, Kyle and I had a different framework of thinking. He continued, "I recruited one of the two remaining close entourages of the Empress. She's the Empress' cousin, and if we let her family be safe, she'll cooperate. I own the right top. If her entourage had a very effective poison, what would the Empress do?" As I thought about it, the nape of my neck went cold. I spoke, "Like you're inducing evil deeds." He then spoke, "It's the Empress' choice to choose which one." Kyle was right, we could narrow her options from tens of thousands to only two. One is to correct mistakes, the other is to harm others. After a thought, Ariel spoke. "I read a book about poisonous weed. Among the various information I obtained from the temple library, there was also information about herbal medicine." Ariel continued, "How about disguising a paralytic poison as a poisonous incense?" After a while, a cold smile appeared on Kyle's lips as the words came out of my mouth. He spoke, "Unlike the person who told me I was inducing evil." His red eyes stared intently at me. He continued, "It's a detailed plan, more villainous than a villain." Then suddenly the chat window popped up. "The god of knowledge, Hest, agrees with Kyle. The god of benevolence, Oman, expresses a deep affection for you." I grumbled a little at the undeniable words. I have a specific life motto that my well-being comes first. If I leave the Empress as it is, my safety will be increasingly threatened. As he looked at me and smiled, I heard his voice. He spoke. "As expected, you're a talent more suited to the imperial palace than the temple." I pretended not to hear him and asked what his next plan was. "But Your Highness." Then, a footsteps was heard, and the person who came in was Rayhousty. He spoke. I was told that His Highness was coming, so I hurriedly stopped. "Bye." His gaze turned to Kyle, but it wasn't a disrespectful or angry voice. "I must have told you last time. The Saintess is a person of the temple, so private conversations about the saints' well-being. Shouldn't you share it with me as well?" The corners of Rayhousty's red lips twitched. Present time in the palace. The Empress muttered, "No way. It can't be." Ariel confronted the Empress. "So you admit to attempting to purchase a lethal poison? In that case, it's over. Please stop this." Surprised by the subject who tried to annihilate everyone here and live alone. "I fell for your treachery." Again. "Impossible." I stared at her with a sneer. At that time, the door of the hall that had been closed opened, and paladins, the Imperial Knights, led by High Priest Rehausti, began to pour in. They saw the situation in the hall and surrounded us. Rehausti's gaze was felt from the back of my head. The Empress, who was trembling and unable to come to her senses, cried out as she looked at the Imperial Knights. She shouts, "The Saintess has made a trick. Surround them." It was a bit of a misleading situation. The guard knights were down, the Emperor had lost his mind, then the Empress and I were standing. And also only Dwayne. It's true that it's hard to guess that a single, powerless Empress could have created such a situation. The Empress shouted, and she tried to frame us instead. The Saintess was instigated by Prince Kyle and tried to put everyone to sleep and then kill them by using a paralyzing poison. With this paladin, Dwayne's grunting was heard behind me. "No, why me?" And according to the gesture of the commander of the Imperial Knights, who was watching the situation, the Imperial Knights drew their swords. As soon as they did that, the paladins also did the same, aiming at the Imperial Knights. The two forces of equal number faced each other with their swords pointed at each other, and the situation in the hall created a tension enough to see blood at any moment. At that moment, Rehausti, with his cool eyes, began to walk. "You mean to see you in danger?" He walked between the Imperial Knights and Paladins who were aiming swords at each other, then the Knights flinched and opened the way at the vivid energy emanating from him. As Rehausti energized the sphere, the Empress' face began to turn white. A familiar voice began to be heard from the sphere embracing holy power. The Saintess, who had a persistent love for the Crown Prince, was ordered by him and tried to kill the Emperor and Empress with poisonous incense. In the process, His Imperial Majesty unfortunately passed away, and the Empress the Prince protected her. Our poor Prince who protected his mother and became a star. The Empress' voice resounded in a high volume and could be heard in the entire hall. The knights began to gossip in surprise. "No, this isn't me," she shouts. The Empress shook her head and stepped back from me. But it was her own voice that was unmistakably audible. "Even if you're the Saintess, you're only human, and you can't stand poison." Rehausti's low-pitched voice continued to be heard. I didn't expect that the precious voice recorder that was presented to the Empress from the temple would be used in this way. His gold eyes were full of bloodlust toward the Empress. The Empress' pupils trembled. And immediately, the commander of the Imperial Knights rang out, "Protect His Imperial Majesty and seize the Empress." The knights immediately poured out and arrested the Empress. She struggled, yet she couldn't resist the power of the knights. She shouts, "No, it's all a conspiracy from that bitch." Her venomous eyes were staring at me until the very end. "Anyway, things have been sorted out." Suddenly, a group of men came in with harsh footsteps. At the sharp wind, I staggered back and turned. I could see the slightly disheveled red hair, the red eyes blazing like the flames of hell, and the blood-covered uniform of the Crown Prince, and the blood-drenched blue blade. As if he was the Demon King from the demon realm, a dark red aura was blooming around him. The final organizer of this situation appeared in time. His red eyes were focused only on the Empress. The Empress, who had rebelled wildly, stopped and stared blankly at him. Her eyes shook violently. Thud. From his right hand, something unrecognizable fell to the floor and rolled like a ball. As I set my eyes on it, I realized it was a human head after a while. Oh, my gods. The god of destruction, Seal, covers his eyes. The god of art, Mond, curses at swords and wielding things because they have no dignity. Prince's cold voice was heard. "Empress, I brought your long-awaited brother." The Empress' face was drained of blood as Alberto's miserable head rolled and stopped slowly. "Alberto." The Empress' voice trembled. Soon, her furious gaze turned to Crown Prince. A desperate voice rang out. It was a voice filled with evil that seemed to pierce the sky. "You're taking everything from me. Even my little brother." Hot tears flowed down her pale cheeks. Crown Prince Kaylee spoke to her with an expressionless face. "The number of innocents you and Alberto killed after you became the Empress is 17. The number of innocents you killed before you became the Empress is 8. If I hadn't saved Noah and Daisy, the 2 would have been added. If I had saved Tina, who came as a fake saintess, it would have lessened by one. Crown Prince. Kaylee's. As of today, Alberto Michael's evil deeds are over. A cold voice echoed through the hall. The Empress, distorted eyes shook. And so are yours. She spoke. Her disheveled hair was a mess. She continued. You don't know my suffering. You ruined everything for me. Kaylee, curse you. The Empress, bloody eyes were tenaciously directed at Kyle. I stared into her eyes. Even if she was a villain, why the hell did she have to do this? It was when I was wondering. The god of love, Odyssey, responds to you. At that moment, I suddenly felt her feet rise. The eyes of the Empress suddenly approached and I felt as if she had entered her eyes. Then suddenly the surroundings that were dark eventually started to light up. I looked around, and faintly heard the banquet music in my ears. Your Highness the Crown Prince. This you dropped this. When I turned my eyes at the young voice, it was the Empress, no, Rosé. I flinched in surprise, but it seemed as if I couldn't be seen in her eyes. Her face looked much younger than now. Perhaps it was in the past before marriage. And the man receiving the pocket watch was Kaylee. Although he looked shorter, his red hair and eyes revealed that he was Kaylee. Thank you. It was such a blunt answer that the listener would be embarrassed. Yet Rosé looked at Kaylee, who turned around after receiving the pocket watch as if that was enough, for a long time. She thought as she looked at Kaylee's back. Someday I will be standing next to him. Just like the oracle I was told by the saintess when I was 13. Her eyes were sparkling like jewels. Seeing the bright red cheeks, I opened my eyes wide, thinking, no way. The scene unfolding in front of me suddenly changed. And there was Emperor and Crown Prince Kaylee. And other nobles who were discussing something. One of the nobles spoke. Among the ladies of the noble families, who is suitable to be the Empress. After the death of the deceased Empress, it seems that her seat can no longer be empty for the sake of the stability of the country. The dark place was the Emperor's audience hall. And in front of him stood Kaylee, who had become a mature young man. He spoke. I think Rosé, the eldest daughter of Count Mikhail, would be most suitable. I have heard that her brother has a bad reputation, but that her own behavior is good. The Emperor had a thoughtful expression on his face. And Kaylee opened his mouth again. I know that Rosé received an oracle from the saintess when she was a child. That she will become a member of the imperial family in the future. The Emperor opened his mouth and muttered. Oh, I see. And outside the door of the audience hall where the audience was being held, something fell. The woman standing with a dazed expression was Rosé, and the thing falling was a handkerchief she embroidered on her own with Kaylee's name on it. Darkness was gradually creeping into her eyes. I couldn't stop wondering, should I call this a joke of fate? How could your highness be like this? The next scene was a certain hallway. The red sunset was illuminating the faces of the two, a man and a woman. Kaylee opened his mouth with a terribly blunt expression on his face. How you do this to me? You know that I have faithfully saved myself. Because I believed in the oracle. That will be married to the imperial family. Tears welled up in her desperate eyes. Kaylee didn't hide his annoyed expression towards her, who was about to cry, and spoke firmly. What's the problem? The oracle has come true. Is there any problem? I know the only reason you approached me was to fulfill the prophecy. I gave you what you want. So what's the problem? At those words, her eyes violently shook. The painful sense of reality and the denial that this couldn't be the case. Deep despair and pain stood in her eyes. After a while, a fierce reaction swelled in her hazy eyes. Her clenched fists were trembling. She shouts, "You have brutally slaughtered my world. Very cruelly." However, Kaylee was just staring at Rosé. With a consistently indifferent look. Her voice was hoarse. Someday. Rosé looked at Kaylee with dark eyes full of hostility and said. You will regret it, Kaylee. I will make you pay for this. Cold dew was forming in her eyes. And at that moment my feet fell off the floor again. I was back in the present. She was a villain, but the story I saw was a deep tragedy. As I looked at her, not knowing what to say, she suddenly used both hands to grab the blade of a knight's sword standing next to her. I was so startled that I couldn't even make a sound. Prince hurriedly pulled out his sword stuck in her chest. Her dress was stained with dark red blood. Drip. Dark red blood flowed from Rosé's lips. I had been calm all along, even when Alberto's head rolled around, and now my heart was pounding like crazy. Kayleigh's voice barely made me come to my senses when I saw him. His red eyes were still burning with cold rage. He said, "She is a woman who shouldn't escape her crimes in this way." Dark bloodlust fluttered behind him. His low voice rang in my ears. He spoke. "She shook the pillars of the empire, tried to assassinate his imperial majesty. She killed my people. She shouldn't die so easily. I don't want you to try to save her." Rosé's eyelids shook, and blood poured out again. It seemed like he was saying it because he was afraid I would save her. I shifted my gaze to Rosé. Her eyes were directed at me. Her bloody hands would no longer have the strength to drive the sword deep. Rayhousdy was staring at me with deep eyes. Why did Odyssey show me those scenes? I stood for a moment and thought. Then I spoke. "Your Highness, I won't save her." His eyes, full of hatred and bloodlust, were as eerie as the devil. She, who was dying helplessly, was also looking at me. I was the only one who held Rosé's right to escape from death here. That fact weighed heavily on my mind like crazy, but I had decided. Kayleigh's eyebrows wiggled at my words that broke the silence. I looked straight into his red eyes. "So I'm going to let her die like this? After all, this is the path she choosed." I confronted him as I looked into his eyes, who was ready to draw his sword at any moment. Until she completely stopped breathing. Her eyelashes, which were trembling, fell down. I could save people, but it wasn't my area to save someone who wanted to die. Even if there is a reason why she shouldn't die like this. The decision not to save one is as heavy a decision as to save one. I just stood silently. It was far from my eyes, but comfort-like words came to my mind. "The god of love, Odyssey, stands behind you." I could see the blood fading from her pale skin. The sparsely exhaled breaths widened, and as she exhaled her last breath once, she was immersed in the sea of eternal rest. With a selfishly calm expression on her face. The scene shifts to the next day. At the temple, Ariel and Daisy were chatting. Daisy spoke. "The country has been turned upside down. It would have been a big trouble for the Saintess, too. Oh my gosh. How dare she think of plotting a rebellion? Only the baby in her belly who died together is pitiful. Really." Daisy let out a small sigh. What happened in the imperial palace was left undisclosed, and to others, it was declared that the Empress had plotted rebellion. The Count of Mikhail was devastated and the Empress faction completely collapsed. Except for the Empress' second cousin, who was hired by Kayleigh to help with this. The Empress' body was immediately incinerated, and the truth wasn't known to anyone. That the child in her womb was fake. It was the decision of the imperial family, fearing that the country would be overturned once again if that fact was known. Ariel spoke. "I also heard that His Imperial Majesty was also bedridden because of it. That can't be happening, but, whatever." The Empress' faction was uprooted, and the listed priests who had internal communication with them were also handed over. Among them, most of the priests sent to the imperial palace were all treated according to the strict new law. The latest examination of priests revealed that the emperor had been poisoned for quite some time. In addition to the chronia the Empress was taking, she used several dark drugs to manipulate the emperor. And after the death of the Empress, the emperor, having learned all that had happened, lay in bed. I tried to heal the emperor with sacred power, but I found out that the sickness of a heart couldn't be cured even with that. Even if I poured holy energy into his weakened body, he didn't have the will to absorb it properly. Then Ariel asked, "Have you not received a message from the high priest yet?" At my words, Daisy nodded her head suddenly. She spoke. "The high priest also. He's too much to leave the temple empty for 10 days at a time like this. Let's go get some wind." I thought it was going to be okay, and I walked the corridor with Daisy. A familiar voice was heard. "Ariel." I slowly turned my head. Red hair fluttered in the light breeze. The color of his eyes in the sun looked a little darker than usual. However, his strong shoulders, tall stature, and a long sword shackle hanging from his waist were creating a sense of intimidation as always. But I turned to look at Kyle and bowed my head slightly. May the blessings of the 9 gods rest upon you, Your Highness the Crown Prince. My dress moved and there was a sound. His face, covered in blood and anger, overlapped for a moment with his clean face, but I shook off the afterimage. Instead of the emperor who was recuperating, it's said that it was his duty to act in the place of the emperor. Now the whole country was his. I came to see you. There is something I want to ask you. Why didn't you save her that day? His words lingered in my ears. I opened my mouth. You really didn't know. At my words, he stared at me with his eyebrows hardened. He looked as if he had no idea. Kyle had no interest in relationships with women. But if Rosé had said that much, at least a little bit of tact. He asked, "What do you mean?" He seemed like a man who wouldn't even notice the slightest bit, so I decided not to talk. And after all, the past was a late empress personal feeling. And knowing the truth won't change anything, so maybe I should keep this as a secret that only I know. The reason I didn't say was because of the God's will. Kyle's eyes became complicated and subtle. He muttered, "The God's will." I continued, "I'm the saintess. Doing the God's will is my priority." Odyssey showed such a flashback scene, so it was really a God's will. It was a pity to have the empress, who committed such a bad thing, die gracefully, but it was still the last wish of the dying. I see. He spoke. I continued looking at him between his nicely folded brows. I asked, "How is His Imperial Majesty?" He replied, "Still not good." A warm wind blew, a gentle breeze, as if the terrible situation of that day was a lie. We stood precariously between the rolling heads, blood, and pressure. I looked up at Prince and said, "Don't blame yourself. The reason His Imperial Majesty is in the sickbed is because of the Empress. It's not your Highness' fault. We need to make sure who is at fault." His eyebrows wiggled. After staring at me for a while, a faint smile crossed his lips and then disappeared. After a while, I heard his voice. "I'm also glad you looked brave." I nodded and smiled. Even so, I was quite strong and possessed a personality with a lot of self-rationalization. A strong wit is a trait suitable even within the imperial palace. Even his jokes are scary. The temple is enough for my makeshift kennel. I spoke up to change the subject. "The weather is really nice today. The blue sky over there. The god of destruction, Seal, is doing his best." As there was only silence in the awkwardness, Kyle, who suddenly glanced up at the sky, continued. "Thank you." I was quietly listening to the unfamiliar words, which were making me shy for no reason. My mouth was dry. He continued, "For letting her die. For preventing me from becoming a real monster." At his words, I stared blankly at him. He looked different from usual. Would I say he is a lonely, untamed beast? Never mind. I looked away from him and wiggled my hands. As expected, and Kyle's low voice, "I think I will be visiting the temple more often in the future." The moment I heard those words, my heart was pounding for some reason. And the status window started flashing. An emergency meeting of the gods was held about adopting Kyle Alexis Ilide as son-in-law. The god of art, Mond, fiercely opposes. The god of knowledge, Hest, demeans those who wield swords, saying that they are really useless. The god of destruction, Seal, bites Hesiod's leg. The god of love, Odyssey, is eating corn crackers. The god of benevolence, Oman, rises on the podium and gains attention. In fairness, he proposes to take all 3 as concubines. A majority of the gods agree. "Stop it." Watching the flickering chat window, I screamed involuntarily. I thought it was going to be weird. Kyle asked, frowning, "Are you talking to me?" Only then did I come to my senses and look up at Kyle again. "No, that's not it. Anyway, now that Her Imperial Majesty the Empress has passed away, the reason why you will often visit the temple." However, his voice pierced my ears. "Since someday, when I see you, something comes to my mind." "Pardon, what are you thinking?" Without realizing it, the end of my voice trembled a little. Everything has a reason. That voice coldly penetrated my abyss. His eyes were glimmering on me. There must be a reason why you became such a different person. A cold voice pierced my heart. I'm very curious about you. The god of benevolence, Oman, is interested in Kyle's sharpness. Sword masters are skilled in Kai, that's why they have good sensitivity. He continued speaking. How would you react if our common enemy was gone and I was still curious about you? I stared blankly at his red lips and finally came to my senses. It's time to end the increasingly dangerous conversation. I bluntly spoke. Now I'm going to have to go inside. It's been a while since I've been under the sun, so I'm dizzy. He then spoke. You're saying you're running away in a roundabout way. I turned away from his gaze, which was silently staring at me, and made a calm voice. I continued. Your Highness, please go back as soon as possible. Don't you feel uncomfortable going on an outing like this when you have a lot of national affairs? He let out a sigh. And spoke. It's always like this. Being barely close is enough. The positive aspect had to be put in for the real relationship of the original story. I don't know if the original story has any more meaning, though. It was when I left Kyle behind and took a few steps towards my room. Suddenly, something appeared in front of me, making me stop flinching. I raised my head slightly, and when I tried to stand sideways, he also took a step to the side. Then I moved to the other side, and he moved the same way. I spoke. What is he doing now? I frowned a little and said to him, would you mind getting out of my way? But he didn't move, and instead showed a soft smile. The light of purple eyes on his silver hair. A handsome face, white skin, and contrasting red lips. His shoulders are broad and he's a little shorter than Kyle, but he's on the tall side anyway. Is he in his early 20s? Then he spoke. I'm a little disappointed. It was a soft smile, yet somehow my spine was cold. A sense of dread that had been in place for a while. He continued. I can't believe you don't recognize me. His voice rang in my ears. The moment I thought, who is it? A chat window flickered in front of my eyes. The connection with the Oracle will be disconnected. What? I didn't even press disable, but my connection with the gods was cut off. Confused, I licked my lips again. He then spoke. Will you remember if you see this? And as he clenched his fist once and opened it again, a silver coin with a murky light flashed in his palm. I took a breath in surprise. Now I know who he is. The guild leader of the Deviamon Magician Guild. Then, behind my back, another move touched me. Prince spoke. What business do you have in the temple? Baron. At that, I opened my eyes wide. Baron. The head of the Deviamon Guild is a baron. The man frowned and slowly turned his gaze to Kaylee. He replied to the prince. I have come to investigate the case for the collapse of the annex of the temple because it's being finalized. Prince muttered, the Lord yourself. He continued. Well, it's a request. From the high priest, so I have to do this much. Kyle nodded his head and spoke. It seems that the saying that Vester built the temple easily is a rumor. Those words pierced my ears. Wait a minute. Vester. If it's Vester. Diego Vester. That villain. The mastermind who sent the real Ariel to her death in the original story. He continued and spoke. There were times when we briefly bumped into each other for a while, but now magicians and priests are getting along well. Wouldn't it be wise to respect each other's territory? As soon as he finished speaking, his purple eyes turned towards me. My heart was beating like crazy. After sending the two men, my mind was confused. I ran towards my bedroom. Don't let anyone in, I said to Daisy as I entered the room. Diego Vester, one of the rulers of the demon realm and the villain of the novel. I found the man, whom I never wanted to run into, on my own. And I was tired of pretending to be enchanted. At that time, I was wearing a holy relic that hides my power, so he wouldn't have recognized me, but I could tell that he had just recognized me again. There were 2 old books about the Devil Realm that I borrowed from the library. Both of them were officially non-existent books, but reading these books over the past few days helped me understand a little about the demon realm. In the demon realm, there is a demon king and demon princes who are its subordinates. Aside from that, many nobles, ordinary demons, and even insignificant demons form a pyramid-shaped hierarchical society. Of course, they weren't large compared to human society, but they were a threat to the extent that everyone could use black magic. In the original story, Diego is the successor of Demon King Leto and a powerful magic duke. He is living as Baron Diego Vester in the human world, but his true identity was like that. Why did he have to be the guild leader of Deviamon Guild? Damn it! Had I known he was Diego, I would never have put such an irrational number. I suddenly heard a voice from behind, breaking my little relief. The saint's bedroom is quite comfortable. I jumped up in surprise. It is true that if you're too surprised, your voice won't come out. As I was staring at him with my big eyes frozen, he gave me a light smile. He continued, "You're also raising a cute egg that appears to have been purchased from the Pencil Guild. Dangerous purple eyes. There was a man who shouldn't be in this room." He spoke in a firm voice. "Ah, don't shout. It will only hurt your neck." It felt like my goosebumps were standing still, but I clenched my fists to regain my composure. The coolness returned after a while. I repeated what he had said, and I knew that perhaps by some trick he had done, my noise wouldn't be heard outside. He then spoke. "You tried to use Deviamon to expel the Empress. The penalty for deceiving me by pretending to be enchanted. I'm worried about how you should receive it. It must have been because of Diego's influence that the Oracle had been disconnected until now." He took 1 step, 2 steps closer to me. I said to him, barely hiding my fear, "I understand you're angry. I would have done the same." His eyes darkened at my words. He continued, "The Empress was completely ousted. I later found out that there was no name Celestine around the Empress. But to see you again at the temple like this." His low voice rang in my ears. He continued speaking, "Should I call this a harvest, or should I call it fate? That you, who deceived me, is that saintess. Why did I only know now?" Whether it was malice or magic, an ominous energy enveloped me. His purple pupils contained deep curiosity. I couldn't understand what he was saying. Oracle activation. I looked at him and spoke over and over again. "Of course, I fully understand why he's angry with me, but I'm a person who puts my safety first." Then I spoke. "If you come any closer, you will get hurt." And a chat window flashed in front of me. The Oracle is activated. However, unlike usual, the Oracle window wasn't clear and flickered continuously. Still, I focused as much as I could. Seeing the window flickering, I could guess how strong his magic was. There was interest in his eyes. He spoke. "I have never seen a saintess with such power. Everyone was a puppet tying up strings, yet you stand on your own 2 feet." I reached out to him as if I were healing. Then a warm light shone on him like a ray of light. It was because the thought that it might be a healing power for humans but an attack for demons came to my mind like an instinct. Diego stretched out his right hand, black darkness pouring out of his hand, colliding with the light. Whether it worked or not, his darkness didn't come close to me. It wasn't the magic of ordinary magicians, it was a black magic called magi. His fine eyebrows trembled slightly. I spoke. "I don't know what you're talking about, but people can't always win and live. You get to know the world by getting hit in the back of your head once or twice." I blatantly advised him. Then, the god of love, Odyssey, is curious about the relationship between you and Diego. The god of knowledge, Hest, speaks of his reasoning. Although the gods were wary of Diego, they were reasoning about his relationship with me. And soon my light began to engulf his darkness. No matter how strong his power is, this is the temple. The house of the gods, the realm of the gods. He said. "So, just coolly forget about the last time." 1 step, 2 steps, he started backing away. But his eyes were as relaxed as if he were dreaming, and his voice was monotonous. "Celestine. Ariel Celestine." I suddenly shrugged at my full name. "I have just decided to regard this meeting as fate. My light almost engulfed his darkness, and he finally smiled faintly as his back touched the window. His voice crept into my ears. Let's take it slow. There's plenty of time. His voice crept into my ears. We will see each other again soon. And in an instant, his body disappeared. As if he wasn't there from the beginning. My hand was looking for its color again. The status window in front of me flashed. I let out a small sigh. And to the gods who were curious, I told the whole story. Even secretly finding the Black Magic Guild and meeting Diego. After a while, the oracle window appeared. The gods are holding an emergency meeting. I stood blankly and sat down on the bed. In addition to the gods and the 3 male leads, even the villain took an interest in me. I don't know what kind of interest it is, but it's true that it's ominous anyway. And I felt that my peaceful dream life was getting farther away. The gods have finished the emergency meeting. The chat window in front of my eyes flickered. Oracle LV4 is opened with the unique power of the gods. The power of the gods can no longer be used to raise the oracle level. And immediately the chat window flashed. The god of knowledge, Hest, uses instinct on you. When the oracle was first opened, Hest tried to use it, but it was a feature that could not be used due to the low level. They consisted mostly of ciphers. It is an irregular code that is impossible to interpret. The god of art, Mont, uses response on you. However, when Mont's response began, the situation changed. The ciphers began to be listed in the form of pictures. A screen unfolded in front of me, and the puzzles began to fit together. The temple, the only recognizable characters were that, and the rest were spread out before my eyes as imaged materials. There was a beautiful woman. Her surroundings were shining with a holy light. And there were 3 men around her. One man was holding a scale, the other was wearing a crown and holding a long sword. Another man was wearing a priest's uniform and holding his hands together. And opposite them, there was darkness. A man with 2 devil horns holding an apple and a lot of demons behind him. The man with the devil's horns reached out to the woman, and gave her an apple. Then suddenly everything became dark. And at that moment, the 3 men turned to ashes and began to disappear. The woman with blonde hair, clothes turned black, and her lips twisted wickedly. The world began to fall into darkness. I woke up from my emotions and looked at the book again. Its letters were disappearing. What the hell is this? While watching that amazing scene, the window in front of me started to glow. The god of justice, Hetus, enters your oracle. Who couldn't enter the oracle, takes over the mat of Hetus. They were gods with a somewhat contradictory mood. The god of knowledge, Hest, welcomes the god of justice, Hetus. The two seem to be close because they are similar. The god of benevolence, Oman, demeans Hetus, saying it's a cross. The god of art, Mond, is a bit disappointed when he learns the identity of the newbie. This side didn't seem very friendly. Excuse me, can you tell me what you just showed me? The god of love, Odyssey, introduces 3 candidates to the new god. The god of destruction, Seal, presents Kyle's videosphere to Hetus as a gift and opens a business. Well, I don't think now is the time to open the male lead's business. I sighed and waited a little longer, yet they didn't explain anything further. What I felt while watching the oracle was that once the flow went in a certain direction, there was no turning back. And for some reason, the gods didn't give plausible information through the oracle. Please take care of me. The newly arrived god. In the end, I slightly bowed to the god who entered my oracle. What does the memory I just saw mean? Up to the beginning, it seemed to be similar to the contents of the original story I had read. Saintess Camilla wins the love of 3 men, and is in a noble position. But what follows is a story that can only be described as ominous. Could the man with the devil's 2 horns have something to do with Diego? His words still linger in my mind. That you, who deceived me, is that saintess. My mind was complicated, the feeling of being handed a piece of a complicated secret. We will see each other again soon. I shook my head. There was nothing to jump to conclusions yet. Sense shifts after 3 days. Rayhousedy returned 3 days later. A priest came running to me and told me that High Priest is injured. He didn't look very well. One of his arms was wrapped in bandages. Of course, there are also blind gods. The god of art, Mond, likes his disheveled top. Contrary to his usual uniform, his tight chest was half exposed, although he looked rather decadent. Are you okay? I looked down at him with a worried expression on his tired face. Shouldn't you rest a little more? You look very tired. It was the first time he had ever shown himself like this. Master, no, Saintess. He seemed a little confused as to whether he was really in a bad state. I asked, where have you been? He replied, I visited Ares mine. Ares was the largest mineral and magic stone production area in the empire. In the original story, it was described as Camilla's hometown. Rayhouse's voice flowed. I wish everything was in my prediction. His face looked quite dark. Feeling strangely ominous, I asked him, what happened? He replied, the gate of the Devildom has exploded in Ares mine. You can take it as a bridge connecting the demon realm has been built. It means that the two worlds that should have been separated were connected by a small gap. That means chaos in our world has begun. Thank you for tuning in to watch this season unfold. Your support means the world to us. We're excited to continue the journey with you in the next story. Until then, take care and stay tuned for what's to come.